Hello beautiful creatures, welcome back to Of Crafts and Curios. I hope you are doing well. Today we are going to be doing a little tips and tricks tutorial video on how I pierce my vinyl doll heads. If shoving needles into vinyl doll heads is not for you, then this is not the video for you, and I recommend checking out any other video on my channel that doesn't include shoving needles through human-like features. So for supplies, you're going to need your doll, and I recommend doing piercings to a doll prior to doing your face up. I'll be using my tutorial doll that I use for all my tutorials, but you want to start with a completely nude base, and you want to grab some little pliers. Mine are a 3-in-1 tool. They bend, they cut, they do some other stuff. I don't know what the third thing is. And you want to grab all sorts of jewelry making supplies. I'm going to run through my favorite ones that I like to use, but if you don't have access to pre-made jewelry accessory tool thingies, then you can easily make these yourself out of jewelry wire or armature wire or anything like that. So my favorite and most accessible supply for doing doll piercings is dressmaking pins, not the cherry pins with the plastic bobble, but the flat metal topped dressmaking pins. These are really cheap. You can get a bunch for a couple dollars and they work wonders. My second favorite jewelry making supply used for my doll piercings is these eye pins. You can get them smaller than 50 mil, you can get them bigger, but they have these like circles already made for you that you just have to open up a bit, and there's your ring for earrings or septum piercing or things like that. You can also use jump rings for this kind of purposeful circular piercing design, or you could use head pins to bend those circles yourself. It's really up to you and whatever you have available. So to begin, I'm just going to prep my tutorial doll. We need a name for her, something that we can call her every time I do a tutorial, but I'm just going to pull her hat off. As I said earlier, it's better to start with a completely blank base, so prior to doing your hair and prior to doing your face up. If you do it like I do after you've done those things, you'll need to pull your hair out of the way, and you will risk damaging the Mr. Super Clear or whatever setting spray or finishing liquid you've used on your face up. I definitely damaged my tutorial doll, but that's okay, that's what she's for. But just so you have been warned, start with a clear base. But that's not to say it's impossible to do piercings on a completed doll. It just means you're going to have to be really careful with how you use your pliers as to not scratch up or overbend the vinyl and crack your setting spray or Mr. Super Clear. So the easiest piercing you can do on a doll is a simple stud piercing. You can do these in all kinds of locations, whatever sort of piercing you want to do that would traditionally have a stud or a barbell in it, you can go ahead and do with a dressmaking pin. And it's literally as simple as shoving the pin into the doll head. I wouldn't recommend doing this if you are making a poppet or a magical doll, as pins do have repercussions with magic. So if you did want to add piercings to a poppet, I would recommend using nail art gems or nail art like metal circles or things like that that you are going to glue on rather than insert into your poppet or magical doll. So my tragus piercing is complete. It's really easy. Doll heads are so massive that a few pins bubbling around inside it aren't going to affect the movement and the neck peg. So I'm going to go ahead and also add a simple lobe piercing that will be with a stud before moving on to doing a ring piercing in an earlobe and then facial piercings. So to prepare an eye pin for any sort of ring piercing, I'm just going to gently open up the circle end of the pin with my pliers, and I'm just opening it up as much as required for the space. So earlobes are going to be wider than septums, so on and so forth. And then I'm going to trim down the pin length, and I'm going to cut it on an angle so that the pin length still has a little sharp end that's going to easily pierce through the plastic. If you don't have pliers, I would recommend using a pin to prep the hole for your circular eye pin made piercing, just so you don't hurt your fingers. But if you are using a pair of pliers to apply force and you don't have to use your fingers, then you can just shove that like slightly cut on an angle eye pin circle into the doll head. It's really up to you. You don't have to prep the doll with a needle first. It's just what you'd prefer. So using my fingers, I'm just pressing my eye pin into the hole I made with a needle, and then I'm grabbing my pliers to help bend and close off that circle and push it in a bit deeper so that it looks like a flush to the skin piercing. Using eye pins like this means you can put as many piercings in the lobe of your doll as you want. It's also great for cartilage piercings and things like that. And speaking of cartilage piercings, now that my hoop piercing is done, I'm going to move on to show you how I make a rook piercing with a dress pin. The first step of this piercing is to bend your dress pin at a slight angle. This is going to make it easier for you to thread it under the vinyl and back through, looking like a real piercing going through and under the skin without hurting your fingers or ripping the vinyl. If you rip the vinyl, it's okay, it's not the end of the world. You just have to adjust your placement. As you can see, I ripped my vinyl the first time I did this, so I am adjusting my placement and trying again. Rook piercings and industrial piercings and things like that are definitely the hardest kind of piercings you can do at this scale, because the ear is not super flexible or defined on a Monster High or Ever After High doll. It can be a real mission. But once you've got it through and it's threaded through like this, you can then move it back and forth and adjust your placement and length, and then you're just going to use your wire cutters to cut the end of the pin off. Mine got stuck on the ear due to my placement, so I'm just fiddling with it, trying to push it down a bit deeper, but I can't get it as deep as I would like on this doll. But the Ever After High ears are definitely different to Monster High doll ears, so selection of doll is super important when choosing a pierceable doll. And with the ears done, let's move on to facial piercings. I'm going to start with, yet again, an eye pin for my septum piercing, and like before, I'm going to prep it in the same way. I'm going to loosen up the circle shape so that there's a little bit of room between the circle end and the beginning, and then again I'm going to trim down the top of the eye pin so it's a bit shorter on an angle so it's sharp, and then push it through my doll nose. Now, again, you want to start this before your doll is painted. You'll see that the doll face squishes deep inside itself when I stick in the septum piercing, and I am making sure to line up my angle so that the doll piercing is going to go into the head towards the neck peg rather than straight up and back out through the rest of the vinyl. This happens occasionally, especially with nostril piercings. You'll stick a pin in and it will shove out through the cheek or something. So bending and trimming down your eye pins and your dress pins are your best chance at not damaging a face up if it's been completed already. Once the piercing part of the process is done, you can then take your pliers and just fiddle around with positioning, length. I'm pushing mine up so that it's not as massive for this doll's nose, and then you can really see how much the face will squish, and that will ultimately damage your face up. So do nostril piercings and septum piercings early on in your face up process, because the more layers, the worse it's going to be. Now moving on to a nostril piercing, you can see I've slightly bent my dress pin at an angle, and then I'm just shoving it in and hoping that it's not going to come out the other side. You could trim your piercing needle to assure that that's not going to happen, and if it does happen, you can just always trim the part that's sticking out the other side. It's really not that hard to fix that sort of problem, but it is frustrating if you have already finished your face up. As you'll be able to see here, once the nostril piercing is in, I have scratched the cheek vinyl and the Mr. Super Clear has removed, and although it's not super noticeable, it would be annoying if you had spent ages on your doll. So now moving on to a nostril piercing but with a ring. Again, I'm using the same eye pins prepped the same way. And once again, you can see that I've chipped my Mr. Super Clear with my pliers as the vinyl was giving a lot of pushback. You could always heat your vinyl if you have finished your face up and you're like, oh no, I want to add piercings, what am I going to do? Just use a little bit of heat, maybe from a hairdryer, or softening it by leaving the doll in the sun for a while so that the vinyl doesn't have as much pushback against the pin. And this way you won't risk cracking your Mr. Super Clear. However, you always will be at risk of damaging your Mr. Super Clear with your pliers, so you need to be really careful about how much contact the pliers have with the face that aren't directly near the piercing hole. Alright, with my nose piercing done, I'm going to move on to some lip piercings. I love to do Medusas and libret piercings on my dolls the most, but you can absolutely do snake bites, studs, rings, anything you want to do. Same method, I'm going to bend my dress pin slightly, and then I'm going to gently work it through as to not rip out through the vinyl where I don't want it to do. Doing a vertical libret is kind of hard, so I would recommend doing this only once you are comfortable with doing a rook piercing on your doll, and then doing Medusas and librets that go straight through, and lip piercings and things like that. Again, is just a variation on the ear piercings that we've done. I didn't love how the vertical libret distorted my lip glossing, so I did just go for a straightforward libret, and this is where I'm going to leave this doll's piercings, as this is just my tutorial doll, not a well thought out designed pierced doll. Your options with doll piercings are endless. These are just a few styles that you could do, but I didn't show you how to do an eyebrow or a bridge or any sort of body piercings like a belly button, but I'm sure those are achievable with these same techniques. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. I know that you guys were loving my piercings in my other videos, so I'm so happy to show you guys how I was doing that and what I was using to do those. If you learned something today or just enjoyed this video hanging out with me shoving some needles into some dolls, hit that like button, leave me a comment down below on what you're getting up to today, and hit that subscribe button if you are brand new here. You can also find me over on Instagram at @ofcraftsandcurios. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys back here so soon with another video.